opportunity. I work at an academic art museum where the exhibitions I do are largely driven by the curriculum and by the needs of professors and students. So this has been a very fun opportunity for me to work with artists who I wouldn't otherwise get a chance to, and to explore areas of my personal aesthetics that wouldn't fit into that kind of academic framework. And Scott and I have been in this dialogue for a number of years. Can I say where we met?
Yeah, totally.
Like, in the bathroom 15 minutes ago. Scott I just finished his MFA at RISD last year.
Yes.
And I was teaching a painting class for a second year, or first year. Yeah, exactly, MFA painting students. And so we've been having conversations in that really strong cohort of very mature painters for graduate students. And so we've been having conversations around Scott's practice, queerness, queer art, references that he makes in his work, from Robert Gober to Rauschenberg and others, for a couple of years. So this is kind of a pleasure.
Yeah, it's kind of funny actually, because I think all of this work was the stuff that was in my studio, like when we had one of our first studio visits. I remember. And we had a couple of Zoom classes when Sam moved to Oberlin. And I specifically remember stitching that piece in my studio on Zoom, and Sam kind of brought it up, and I was like, am I in trouble for working during class? Is this like a good thing?
I never knew people were eating or making art. I just saw like substance.
Totally. I was trying to make it clear that I was working on like very important creative projects and not just something. But yeah, it's nice to revisit this work, which isn't that old, but like it kind of feels like a lifetime ago because of the transition out of school being so crazy, and I don't know, just like that we kind of started together like through this work, and now we're here. It's nice.
It's true.
Yeah.
So you have work in this exhibition representing a couple different bodies or types of work that you do in your practice. I feel like there's 3 different types.
Okay.
What can you just describe I don't know if you say that there's more or less than that, but what are those
3
categories? I mean, you're trained as a painter. These are very sculptural works also. Can you just describe what are those different types?
Well, also for like people who don't know, I made these 2 like upholstered things, and then also this painting behind me, and then on this sort of like diagonal wall, you can't see it from where you're sitting, but like the small black framed piece. And they definitely, I mean, I'm kind of interested in trying to like aim towards being an artist where like I have a conceptual and emotional basis that kind of stays the same, like a set of questions and concerns, but that like I'm trying to tackle those questions through kind of every angle possible. And so I think that like while the work looks very different, it's like a little bit of a superficial difference in a way. And I remember like I started making transparent paintings kind of at the beginning of grad school because I had this, I guess I've always kind of had this deep ambivalence about painting. Like I want to be a painter in like a capital P kind of way, just like the discipline of being there with a set of materials, oil and canvas, and kind of like working in those parameters. But for some reason I can't really like stop myself from going outside of that. And so I wanted to make these paintings that kind of, I mean, they really are kind of like performing as paintings, but their material interest is really different, and just like treating it really as an object, and doing that by kind of like exposing the inner workings and the materials that you would usually not see, I guess. And I do think that that kind of led to the other 2 bodies of work, if we want to call them that, in the sense that like once I was making transparent paintings, it felt like I was giving too much away almost. Like everything about them is on display. They're like kind of vulnerable. And I think, not to jump ahead, but it kind of relates to some of our conversations we've had about like what queer art or queer failure, or whatever those terms mean in art. And so I wanted to make these works that were closed off almost, and like kept things to themselves, which I feel like the upholstered works do that a little more. Like the surface is really important to them, but it's like obvious that there's like an interior that we don't have access to. if that makes sense.
There was a 1.5-year-old girl in the gallery last night, and she wanted to know how to get inside that object. So she was circumambulating it over and over, and she would just want to know, like, what is the interior? What is the inside?
It's perfect.
Exactly. It is this, like, I don't know exactly what the word is, but yeah, sealed in a way, which is the kind of the opposite of this painting, which is like bearing all seams, and the interior is like exteriorized.
Totally.
And you said vulnerable, which this work I feel it's like skin, like stitched together. It feels very vulnerable and very fragile. And I mean, I know that you're a very like incredible maker, so it's not, but it looks that way. Whereas this feels more kind of like, I don't know, like muscular or robust, but just more like finished or polished or something. It's not doing that exposing of the seams in the same way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do think they've started to weather in a way that I didn't know how to anticipate, and they're kind of, maybe like the work will converge in a certain way after it's like lived long enough. But I definitely think at that time, you're right, I wanted it to have this kind of feeling of being meticulous and like robust and kind of like, I mean, the question of like whether you act in some way with the object, especially maybe those two, was really like on my mind at the time, and thinking about that, and like if you want to have a piece of art that an audience can interact with, there's like such a set of problems just logistically about like how do you make it stand up to some audience doing whatever they want with it. And that was something I kind of avoided getting too bogged down in, but I think it like left me in this interesting place where I sort of wanted people to like consider maybe a virtual body, like projecting their body outwards, and like what would I do with this? Without really knowing where the line is of like whether they have permission or whether it would be like transgressive. And so like just kind of shifting materials and trying to think through some of that definitely was important to me at that time.
I like that you bring up this idea of consent, like two consenting bodies, one being an artwork.
There.
Viewer. And then, so queer failure.
Yeah.
Sometimes I describe your work that way to people, and I feel bad. Like I feel now I'm doing it to your face, but I usually wouldn't. But I usually wouldn't for this. I mean, because they're very, very sophisticated, nuanced, thoughtful things that you've spent hours upon hours making. But to me, there's something honest and kind of like brave and bold about engaging with the concept of failure. So like the droopy wire is one place where I see it. This spring, the two of them are like boing, and one is like meow. So that kind of the holes, the ripping open, like I don't know. I mean, everyone probably sees the idea of failure or thinks about it very differently. Those are just a few of the visual pieces that jump out to me. But like, is that a productive term for you? And how, I don't know, how do you relate to it?
I mean, I'm definitely interested in it. First of all, I love your sound effects for the spring. I should just say that. But yeah, it's interesting to me. I feel like it's a phrase that was bandied about so much in grad school, and maybe is already kind of like past its peak. Like, I don't know, I feel like I don't really hear people talking about it as much after. I mean, it's probably been like 8 or 10 years since that Jack Halberstam book, The Queer Art of Failure, at least, I think. And so I guess I haven't been like chewing on it as much anymore, but I do think that at the time I was really trying to figure it out, because people would always come into the studio and talk about that kind of thing, like talk about what was the work trying to do, was it succeeding, how do you like make failure a goal in a way that isn't like self-defeating, like is that even possible? And those conversations definitely came more out of some of the earlier work I was doing, like the paintings, and when I was making a lot of collage and works on paper and things like that. And so with these upholstered works especially, I was kind of trying to find my way out of that, to be honest. I was kind of thinking like, okay, if this is an exhausted term, like what are the options? Because when you think about like the flip side, it would be the queer art of success. Like that is, what would that mean? It seems sort of impossible, And I think that, it's weird because I get when I start to think through the terms in my head, I get really kind of binary about it in a way that I don't know how to avoid. Like, I think it's just something about the way the language works where it's hard to not flip between, like, the work is queer, no, it's the opposite of that, or like the work is about failure, or it's about success, and like finding some sort of middle ground. But that definitely led me to trying to craft these objects like more meticulously and have them feel a little bit more, I don't know, almost like ready-made in some way.
Yeah.
And brought me definitely to like minimalists, which I hadn't really, I mean, I was not really thinking about Donald Judd ever, and then suddenly I made this purple box and I was.
Yeah.
And it was like, where does this leave me? Like how, yeah, I don't know. It was a weird moment, I think. I think we even had a little, not an argument, but a conversation once about like whether we could pretend that any of Judd's sculptures kind of had like a queer aesthetic or not, you know? And I put that forward and you were very skeptical. But it is sort of interesting to me because it's one of those things where like, yeah, the term is impossible to pin down, and maybe that's like what's exciting about it, and maybe it makes it useless in other times, but I think I'm rambling a little bit now, but does this make sense?
I'm just like avoiding saying that you have cleared a Donald Judd.
No, I have, yeah. Let's
Just
avoid
because
that.
we don't want to be saying that kind of thing. But
No, I would not say that either.
No, but and also like I said, I'm not used to working in a commercial context where the works are for sale.
Yeah.
So I feel like I could use words like failure in a critical academic context, and that could be fine. But I don't know, someone is gonna at the end of the day have to go out and be like, buy this failure art, you know? And so I didn't use that term.
Honestly, it might have worked as a perfect.
Right, I know.
It's possible.
And that, I mean, by the same token, like, one of the things that I'm really drawn to in a lot of these works is fragility, vulnerability. And so we're sitting among also works in this part of the gallery by Leeza Meksin and Tuesday Smillie. And so they're really, really engaging with this idea of contingency and hand-wrought qualities. And so not polish or muscularity, and definitely, I don't think, success or whatever.
Yeah.
So I kind of also try not to use the word messy, well, because I kind of feel like that could be disrespectful, but actually that's one of the things I love about those practices is that they don't clean up mess. They turn it into this formal element of messiness.
Totally.
And I don't know if you do that. Maybe.
I think it depends on the work. I mean, when I made these two in front of me, it was like I was really striving for control. And there was something about that felt good, but it's kind of interesting that like, you know, anytime you're making a painting and you get some stray drip or whatever on the surface, like that's an accident, I guess, but then you still have the choice to leave it or clean it up. Like I don't know, I'm interested in like the things that are unintentional when making a work, but it's like kind of ultimately I feel like you can argue that there aren't really any accidents, you know, it's just kind of like your level for tolerating things to be premeditated or not, you know? But I think like a good word, I mean the word that comes to mind for me is like contingent maybe, instead of messy, because it's kind of like in a certain context, it would be like wrong, you know, in terms of craft, like Jen's paintings that have the weaving. There's like something about them that's, of course, it's like breaking out of the traditions of weaving, and so that's like messy or that's a failure if you want to like look at it in a certain way. But I think it definitely speaks to a different kind of like willingness to like play, I suppose. And that with a lot of these pieces too, like a thread that I really notice is kind of modularity, you know, and that I think a lot of them, it feels like, okay, these are two works, but they kind of could be one if you rearrange them, or like my two pieces could be plugged into each other by the cord, or Leah's pieces could be like I don't know, taken apart and the different components of them could be put together, and there's something about that isn't clean, and it's not like simple, and it leaves a lot of agency for both the artist and the viewer to kind of decide what is right or like what works. You know what I mean? Like messiness is open. It's open to interpretation.
Yeah, and I think all the artists in this exhibition are working with very rigorous and intensive processes and kind of approaches to their material. So there's this sense of constraints that they're playing with, and so they're kind of looking for the moments of like freedom within those constraints.
Yeah.
And so you see it in there's grids, but then the grids are like kind of warping.
I was talking to Jen about that at the opening last night, because I was telling her that like I was living in a craft school for a while, for like 2 years, and I took this weaving class, and I was really excited about it, but it's like consciously going into it, I knew that it meant everything had to be on this right angle grid, and that you're like really kind of dominated by the machine of the loom, you know?
It was loom weaving.
It was loom weaving. And like, of course, there are kind of ways around that, but for all intents and purposes, like you really have this machine that has like a huge voice, and I couldn't handle it. And so Jen was telling me like she kind of had the same problem, but would like switch to tapestry or like cut the weaving apart and put it back together, you know, kind of like ways of getting around that sort of
or the width of like the yard is kind of like
totally. Yeah.
I like it that machine is like
I mean, I don't know. It's
and with Jen's painting you have that like very, very intensive under-painted layer or those like diamond shaped recomposed things, which is like almost mathematical and like precise and exacting. But then the weaving over it, she lets like some of the warp through, and so she's I think doing some of those things that we were just talking about you doing in your painting.
Yeah, it's kind of I feel like we're in this weird, intense, interesting moment of like kind of people wanting to reconnect to tradition almost, or like past or discipline in their making practice, but also like being aware at the same time of kind of how that can bring you to this almost like conservative place where like you have to follow a set of rules and like all of the baggage of that kind of lineage, and like the push and pull of wanting to invest in some sort of, I don't know, almost more like historical or like craft and hand-based way of making things, as opposed to kind of like the freedom of, I don't know, just like putting fabric together, a sort of more self-taught, more, I mean, arguably like contemporary way of making things. And it feels like, I don't know, it just feels like that tension lately has really been on the rise, like in my practice, and I think in a lot of artist practices that I'm in like conversation with. You know what I mean?
I do. There are, even in this exhibition, a few artists who are really interested in histories of craft and industrial design. So like Julia Kunin has spent periods in Hungary working in the ceramics workshop there. And Leah Guadagnoli is making reference to like Art Deco architecture, but also like Art Nouveau. And Leeza Meksin has like sewing machines around her studio. And I think that kind of leads to this confrontation where you get something like the idea of queer failure. Because it's like you're kind of wanting to reinvest in some of those things, like learning how to weave or natural dyes or ceramics or whatever, and it feels like the only way out of a kind of like top-down authoritarian approach to those things is to almost be like a bad kid about it, where you like mess it up. You know, you have to like get in there and like make everything messy, like smear the pot or like smash it, or like, you know what I'm saying? Kind of just fracture everything. But it leaves you in kind of this place where it's like, why did you go there to begin with? Why did you kind of like have the draw towards like this more like embedded way of making things in a lineage? It's just like one of those problems where like you go in a circle over and over and over again of wanting to accept something and then feeling like the need to push it away at the same time. So along those lines, I kind of wanted to ask you about the precursors of other artists who I see very, very, very direct references to in your work. Like In the piece on that angled wall there, the kind of collage work, Rauschenberg, you're using some of the exact same processes like printing on plexiglass and various things. Except you're also, but there's you're really updating or extending is how I would put it, some of those traditions or lineages, which was the word you used. And the piece in the window with the stick, and then what looks like the kind of thing that you would hitch a trailer to on a car, but also kind of, I feel like, could be like a butt plug or something.
Totally.
Or, yeah.
I feel like the perfect word for that object is bauble. You know, like B-A-U-B-L-E. It's just like there kind of hanging out. It's actually a door handle that I scavenged it from my grandfather's house. He was like a builder for most of his life and a little bit of a hoarder too, I think, because he was like living in the Midwest. And I think like his generation, you know, there was kind of sometimes this tendency to just really collect everything. And so I was going through all of this kind of construction material and like weird objects and just trying to like give those things a little bit of a new life. But in terms of like referentiality, I mean, I think really generous of you to say that I'm updating Rauschenberg. I don't know if that's possible, you know, just because I mean, I saw this show of his at Gladstone recently. I mean, I guess it was in the spring, but it was just so like kind of blew my mind. But that is, of course, like he plugged the painting into the wall first, I think, you know. And when I was making this work, obviously that was kind of in there, but it wasn't really intentional. Like I did it, it felt like it needed to have this power conduit so that the object could like really feel like it had the potential for action. And then it was only later that I kind of put those things together and realized, okay, this is something that is like pretty directly lifted just from an artist that I really admire. And I have gone through, I mean, it's hard for me because I see a lot of contemporary artists who are really willing to super directly, almost on the nose, like reference the artists that came before them. And in some ways I really admire that because it's like you're putting yourself directly in conversation with the people you want to be in conversation with, whether it's like one way or it's requited. But at the same time, I like really have a hesitation to get too close or to go too far. And trying to find like that middle ground, I think it can just be slippery, you know.
I think Tuesday Smillie is thinking about Felix Gonzalez Torres with this beaded curtain, and the piece where, was it a closet door handle?
I don't know, it could have been.
Anyway, the door handle, your grandfather's door handle, that I want to stick up my anus, is hanging from it is a stick that looks identical to a very specific work by Robert Gober also, which you hadn't even seen, you didn't even know about.
No, I'm so glad you showed that to me because I actually like this feels more justified now.
But so this kind of relationship that you have to precursors who are clearly influential to you, I don't know if you would care to describe it. Like, I kind of feel like you honor them and swerve away. I said extend, but I don't know.
I tried. I think swerve, that's what I would like to do. That's what I'm trying to do, definitely. That feels right. And it probably relates to this sort of like running theme in our conversations about queerness that like you actually just, you can never replicate it. You can never replicate the thing. I mean, I don't know, it just feels like at times I worry that it gets very almost like self-absorbed or individualistic to like worry about originality, but that's not, originality is like not really what I'm searching for. I think it's more of what you're saying, a swerve of like being in a relationship, but then just kind of like twisting a little bit and just,
What was Rauschenberg's, did it electrify actually?
It was just
was there like a light bulb?
I don't think it, I mean, maybe there were some that did that, but the one I'm thinking of, I don't think it did anything. It was just kind of this idea that like the painting was plugged into the museum and the whole museum was
okay.
You know, like there was no boundary anymore between like the artwork and the rest of the world.
I just, for those who are tuning in remotely, I just looked to our audience because half of them have PhDs in art history. More than half have PhDs in art history. I was like, actually, no, Mr. Ashenberg.
Wow, I
There
didn't
is
know
one with a
that.
light bulb that plugs in.
With a light bulb that plugs, yeah, there's some that actually
Yeah.
function with a fan or like a light bulb or something, so I wasn't sure. But just because it seems like different to have something that plugs in
Yeah.
for this like functional
Yeah.
kinetic.
No, totally. I mean, that was one of the major interests for me for those works specifically, was kind of like, is it more interesting to have a little bit of disappointment that like you could literally plug these two objects in together and like nothing would happen? Like, I don't know. I think that there's something
Would
about
nothing
that.
happen? I feel like some part of my body would start tingling.
I mean, that's enough maybe, if it would electrify
Straight
you. But yeah, I think there was a time where I thought, okay, this purple piece, for example, if it like vibrated around the room, that would be amazing, and like the springs don't make any crazy noises. But at the same time, like that can be, first of all, like kind of gimmicky, but second of all, it's almost like you're performing too much for your
Yeah.
audience. Like I think that there's something that you
Yes.
need to kind of hold back a little bit,
Yeah.
make them do some work,
Yeah.
whether it's mental or emotional or
Yeah.
whatever.
We talked about installing it on a Roomba.
yeah.
And I feel like the 1.5-year-old would have been much less interested because then it was
Yeah,
like,
maybe.
duh, like I get this.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Huh.
Whereas this has these latent vibrations
Yeah.
and like actions that you have to just wonder actually what would that sensation be.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit like having a tool without like the user manual, you know? It's just kind of like, wait, what am I supposed to do here?
Right. And actually, well, that's how I feel in a Home Depot. in general.
Honestly, same.
But you don't, because look at you like deploying all of this hardware.
Yes.
You could work at Home Depot.
Deploying
actually.
it in the total
and you
wrong
would do really
direction.
well with that
I would
orange,
love-
that orange color.
Honestly, that would be a thrill. I usually go to Lowe's because I think they're a little more like allies. But I think, yeah, I would do
Shoes are
pretty,
the Lowe's.
I would do pretty well at the Home Depot.
But that actually, so the title of this exhibition is Under This Mask, Another Mask,
Yeah.
which there's different ways that it could be translated. It's really in French by the artist Claude Kunin.
Mhm.
It's actually, it appears in one of their collages.
Okay.
I was hoping that people would get like the reference to like mask as in masculinity, like in queer relationality, like mask for mask. But I don't know. Did you get that?
I mean, I feel like I just didn't think about it.
How-
But
okay.
it's of course
Like
I
almost
should
all
have
queer
thought about it.
artists, it's called Under This Mask.
Totally.
And like under this mask, just think about it, it's a masculine person under this mask.
No, it's actually super true. It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And these two sculptures are mask for sure. If they were gonna get together, it would be very mask for mask.
They're very bright for mask.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but they're like a little bit spiky and like aggro.
I
don't
won't
know.
say you're queer
We can't
mask,
gender. We
but
can't gender objects. It's too late for that.
They only have like 1,500 palaces poked at them,
Yeah.
but again, can't be gendered.
Yeah. Totally.
But no, the reason I mentioned Home Depot, no, masculinity.
Because all of this stuff in there is pretty gendered heavily.
Yeah.
You know. I think
Yeah,
that's
and
true.
even just seeing all of this hardware,
Yeah.
this, and in other works of yours, like hinges and just these things that I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel estranged from. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't thought about this too much, but in a way, it feels kind of. I should like process to what degree it's personal, because definitely it's making me think now of like this kind of lineage from my grandfather who built houses for a living to like my dad who's kind of bumbling but loves to like try to fix things, and then like to me where I don't know, like I probably couldn't fix something if I tried, but I'd love to just like get some hardware and like put it together in the wrong way, you know, and just, yeah, that is sort of interesting to me. It's like a separate lineage than the one that I mostly think about when I make work, but maybe there's something there. Yeah.
You have more bodies of work that you do than we were able to bring to
Yeah.
LA for this exhibition. is there a type of object that you either have or are thinking about making that would round out or flesh out its presentation in a way?
I think, yes, there's that one sculpture that we almost put in the show that was,
You don't have to put it like that.
What do you mean?
You just, the way I did, like, if you know, okay, whatever.
I mean, I think, like, when I finished school, I, like, kind of took these concerns from the other work and tried to, like, push it all the way to the end.
Yeah.
And actually what happened was that after I made all of this work that is here in this show, I, like, had this experience at the Met where I went to the room where they have, like, all the shaker art, and that, like, kind of was amazing and beautiful and, like, devastating in a weird way. And I thought, like, am I getting almost design adjacent? Like, all of this interest in utility and kind of, like, wanting to just make objects that, like, you have a question about their purpose was really, like, bringing me in that direction in a way that kind of freaked me out. And I think that, like, with these objects, it's there, but it could be pushed further. And so, yeah, I made a lot of work that responded to that room and kind of, like, mirrored the way that it was laid out, and, like, took some of these aesthetics and just heightened them. I would say the green piece in the window is, like, the closest to that body of work, especially because that one, more than any of the others, kind of brings in these questions of, like, nature as well, and, like, what is natural, and like how we just kind of perceive objects as, like, right or wrong, essentially, as like natural or uncanny, and, like, where the divide is for those different things.
So the like shaker reference is, like, there's, like, a bar like 5 feet off the ground of the room with hooks on it, and then Scott kind of, like, did a version of that. So there's, like, sculptural, kind of more brightly colored, like, gloves and bucket.
Totally, it's like a lot of utilitarian objects that feel like. So, like, in the shaker room, the rack goes all the way around the space, and there's, like, a chair hanging on it, and mops and different things like that, and, like, they really had this kind of push to, like, purity and cleanliness. That's a sort of divine thing, and I feel like that's, like, a tendency that appeals to me in a certain way, like, wanting to really almost sanitize, which happens in the work sometimes, but then also, like, wanting to just make them more complicated, and so I made a lot of objects that just felt like sort of like the abject, like, shadow side of that idea of, like, perfect order and perfect use and utility and things like that.
And that installation that was in your thesis exhibit, right? Also actually made me want to cry. And I don't know what it is exactly, and whether it's maybe similar to your experience in the room, the period room at the Met, but I think it's this sense that I get in a lot of your works that, like, something traumatic has happened, or something painful, a failure maybe, and a defeat, and that this is, like, things have been cleaned up, and now the device is used to clean up the mess hanging in the wall, on the wall, and you see kind of, like, the repair happening where it happened or something.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't really think about my work consciously in that way, but it's, like, a comment that people have made to me, like, in many critiques or different shows or whatever, that is, like, somehow this thread. And I think, like, I mean, all of the objects, a lot of the materials that I gravitate to, even if it's just, like, a hardware store item, there's, like, always that kind of almost, like, emotional metaphor, kind of, like, baggage that's just, like, hardwired into different things, if that makes sense, and like how we kind of need to, like, use things in the physical world to, I don't know, really control not just, like, our surrounding, but, like, our kind of interior landscape and just, like, our sense of being in the world. And I mean, I guess that's a very fundamental, but just the tangible and the intangible worlds being, like, so mixed up with each other, and the way objects become fraught over time. I think that's definitely something that's running in my practice.
I am interested to know if, I kind of want to open up the discussion a little bit, in case others have other thoughts or ideas or questions for you. But I just wanted to first thank you, because I feel like I've learned a lot
Thank you.
from you, both about your practice about making art and art history. Like Scott often tips me off to essays I should have read, honestly, but haven't ever. So
I mean, likewise.
I know you said you stopped reading after grad school.
Yeah.
So
I'm post-literate now.
I don't know. And then also just ask if there's anything else you wanted to say about your work here, or.
Not really, honestly.
Okay.
Just I'm really glad to be in this show, so thank you, and thanks for talking. It's always a good time.
Same.
Yeah.
So with that, there's no pressure to do that, but if anyone has anything they'd like to add to the conversation.
I have a question. As you've been talking about lineages and sort of this desire to work within certain traditions and then kind of pushing back on that and wanting to mess it up or do your own thing, I was curious, you referred to this twice as a painting. And I was interested in just a very formalist question of like, why to you is that a painting and why is it important to call it that?
That's such a good question.
Because there's little black splotches.
Come on. I mean, you can call whatever you want.
Yeah,
but
right.
That word is obviously heavily freighted in
Yeah.
relation to your other work. I'm just curious.
I know, I mean, that's a foundational question, and I am like worried that I'm not gonna have a good enough answer because I'm pretty like lax about that kind of thing. Like I actually love to just call things paintings in maybe a really tongue-in-cheek way, like almost just the ease of reference, and to try to sort out like, what is this medium, what is this genre, is like, you're just gonna be scrambling forever. You know, even if it's as simple as like, where's the line between a drawing and a painting? Or like a painting that's freestanding in the middle of the room, like what is it at that point? And so sometimes it's just like, if it's on the wall, I'll just call it a painting in the moment, you know? But I don't know, I mean, it definitely shifts a lot because when I made this work, it was originally actually like a triptych and it was hinged. So they could freestand in the middle of the room, which like, I don't know, it's almost maybe more interesting to me to think about it as a painting in that moment, when it is kind of like in the viewer's space and like just standing upright, and you really are more than ever kind of invited to like do something with it, to move it around the room at least, whereas like
Even more Rauschenbergian.
yeah, it kind of is.
It's not a bad thing, but
no, I mean, I'm obsessed with Rauschenberg, so it feels like a good thing, but I'm, can't get too close to yeah, I mean, last night at the opening, I was kind of like, what if I just took it off the wall and like wheeled it around? That would really change the energy in here. But I think there's like more of a division with something that's on the wall ultimately. Like it just has all of that history of like painting is a virtual window. Like painting is something that you look into and you're somewhere else. And so there's kind of like a safety there, I think, which is why the wheels are there and why that protrudes from the wall, because I just like want more of a collapse between like the viewer space and the space of the work. Yeah.
I think it's interesting, Andrew, that you like question why it's a painting, because for me, I mean, I think of it, I guess, more literally, like, oh, of course it's a painting. Like, you see, like, it looks like a stretched canvas, and for me, it does really remind me of Rauschenberg, and of course he does like a assemblage and sculpture, but I think of him as a painter. And then, of course, the wheels, it's like, oh, it's a painting being moved around the gallery, like, to be installed.
Yeah.
But I like that it's on the wall, because then you have, like, sort of the ineptitude of the wheels there, and like, the plug that doesn't do anything.
Totally.
It's parallel.
Thanks, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, what I really should do actually is get 2 little jars, and one says painting and one says sculpture, and then like put a couple dollars in each and then see what happens. Let the people decide.
It's not your problem.
Yeah.
You have a degree in painting, so you can call yourself
I know.
a painter if you want. But it's a museum problem, because we have departments of painting and sculpture, drawn to photographs, and so we would have to figure out how to registrarially catalog that object. That's not your problem.
I've never even thought about that.
It's not a problem you invented. You But I will just say that there's all kinds of implications, I think, which is the question of using that term. And there is, for example, I'm not going to name names, but a mega gallery 5 blocks from where we are right now And I was walking through an exhibition there with one of their directors of an artist, and I said, you know, it's interesting that you keep referring to these works as paintings because the artist has ripped these posters and put them in this way on a support, and so there's not at any moment been paint or paintbrush used in the production of this object. In fact, it's actually a collage, like the dictionary definition of collage.
True.
And she's like, well, we can't ask $5 million for a collage, so they're paintings. So that's another interesting valence of.
I mean, they are in a position to change the culture and make us all realize that collage is the most highbrow art forms, which I've always maintained. But yeah, that was pretty crazy.
Like, I was writing a wall label for a museum presentation of a Yoko Ono object that you will know, which is, I referred to as a painting, and the person editing the label said, like, this is not a painting. And so I changed it to, like, pigment applied on canvas, the description of the object. So, I don't know.
Literal.
Yeah, but I think this is a painting because it's a stretch. There's a stretcher, there's a support, and I actually don't know what else to say besides that, but that to me makes it a painting. But
I think that's fair.
Other thoughts, questions? That is a great note to end on.
Okay, totally.
Thank you for
Yeah, thank you
coming
guys.
today, and thank you, Scott.
Thank you.